This year's theme, Be a Marigold, invites us to reflect on the importance of seeking out people who nourish us, those who offer support, reassurance, and guidance rather than depletion. It reminds us that we grow best when we are surrounded by care, and that part of our responsibility is to become that same steady, life giving presence for others. This idea of intentional connection, of choosing community over isolation, is one that I believe Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have deeply appreciated. His vision was never rooted in individualism, but in a joined society, one where people are bound together by mutual care, shared responsibility, and the understanding that our liberation is inseparable from one another's. What I appreciate most about the marigold flower is that it isn't symbolic in a vague or romantic way like other flowers. It's actually very practical. Marigolds are planted with intention. They're often grown alongside more delicate plants, not because they dominate the garden, but because their presence changes the conditions. They strengthen the soil, they deter pests that would cause harm, and simply put, they make it easier for other plants to thrive and survive. Because marigolds don't compete for resources, they don't demand attention, they just exist in relationship. And that feels very important right now because so much of our culture teaches us to survive alone and to be self sufficient, resilient, and unaffected. But Dr. King understood that survival and liberation are collective acts. He reminds us that, quote, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, end quote. Part of being a marigold is learning to be honest about the environments we're growing in. Some environments encourage honesty, creativity, and rest, while others normalize exhaustion, silence, and emotional depletion. And learning to tell the difference isn't about judgment, it's about care. Seeking marigolds in our lives means choosing people who support our growth without trying to control it, people who tell us the truth without shaming us, and who stay present when things get uncomfortable. Dr. King didn't imagine change happening through isolated heroes. Movements were sustained by elders, students, faith leaders, neighbors, people who protected one another when the work became too heavy. Community wasn't an accessory to the movement, it was the movement. So when we talk about community care, we often treat it like a bonus, something we get after everything else is handled. But psychology and indigenous wisdom tell us something very different. Many of us are familiar with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the idea that humans must have their basic needs met before they can fully thrive. It's usually shown as a pyramid, with self actualization at the very top, something we reach only after safety, belonging, and stability are secured. But what often gets left out of the conversation is this: Maslow's work was heavily influenced by First Nations knowledge, particularly the Blackfoot Nation. And that perspective reframes the hierarchy entirely, shifting how we understand our needs and growth. In many First Nations worldviews, people are not born incomplete, we are born whole. Self actualization is not the reward at the end of the rainbow, it is the foundation. And from that foundation, community actualization becomes possible. In other words, When individuals are supported in being fully themselves, the community benefits. And when the community is healthy, individuals are more likely to thrive. The relationship is circular. This tells us something essential. Care is not something people earn after proving their worth. Care is what makes participation possible. Dr. King understood this deeply. His vision of the beloved community wasn't rooted in the idea that people needed to be fixed before they belonged. It was rooted in the belief that belonging itself is what allows people to grow. That's why his work wasn't only about changing laws, it was also about changing the conditions, conditions that made dignity possible, conditions that allowed people to breathe, to rest, to hope. A marigold doesn't tell another plant to just struggle harder. It changes the environment so growth can actually happen. That is what community care looks like in practice. Not saving people, not perfecting them, but creating conditions where humanity can take root. So this theme doesn't just ask us to seek marigolds, it asks us to become one ourselves. And becoming a marigold doesn't require perfection or authority, it requires presence. Being a marigold can look like noticing who feels unseen and making space for them, speaking up when silence would be easier, offering consistency instead of intensity, and choosing care even when it's inconvenient. Dr. King reminds us that progress doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like staying, like tending, like continuing even when the work feels slow. Marigolds grow that way too. They're steady, grounded, rooted wherever they are planted. So, as we honor Dr. King today, I invite us to reflect on the gardens we're a part of. Who helped you grow when the conditions weren't ideal? Who made it safer for you to be fully yourself? And how might you offer that same presence to someone else? Because when we choose to be marigolds, when we choose nourishment over neglect, connection over isolation, we don't just remember Dr. King's words. We participate in his vision, a joined society, a cared for community, a future rooted in shared responsibility. I love you.